When my son's hands pressed against my back, I thought at first it was a mistake, a stumble, a slip on the rocky path. But then the force increased, deliberate, merciless. I felt my body surge forward, gravity pulling me toward the jagged edge of the cliff. The ocean roared beneath me, waves crashing against the rocks like an angry chorus. My heart slammed in my chest, not from the fall itself, but from the betrayal, the horrifying realization that it was my own son, Ethan, who had pushed me. At that precise instant, just as the wind whipped around us and the world blurred in a dizzying rush, I felt my husband Robert's breath hot against my ear. His voice was barely more than a whisper, but it carried the weight of survival itself. Pretend we're dead. Good morning, my dears. My name is Mabel Carter. I am 72 years old, and today I will share with you a story I never thought I would have to live, let alone recount. If stories like mine make you reflect on the boundaries of love, betrayal, and courage, I ask you to like this video, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. I always read them, and your words give me strength to keep telling the truth. The ground struck my side with a violent crack, and pain shot up my ribs like fire. I landed on a narrow ledge just below the cliff's lip, hidden from sight if one looked down too quickly. Robert landed beside me, his body twisted awkwardly, his face pale but alive. We both stayed perfectly still, clinging to the unforgiving rock, breathing shallowly. My mind screamed to move, to cry out, to confront Ethan and demand an explanation. But Robert's whisper burned in my memory. Pretend we're dead. If Ethan saw us stir, if he realized the fall had not finished us, then he would make sure it did. Above us, I heard the shuffle of shoes against gravel. Stones dislodged and clattered down the cliffside. Ethan's voice was faint, strained with anger and panic. "It's done," he muttered, as if convincing himself. My heart cracked inside me. This was the same voice that, as a child, once called me mommy in the dark when nightmares kept him awake. Now it was the voice of a man who had decided that my life was worth less than the promise of money, less than his debts, less than his greed. Robert's hand squeezed mine, firm despite the tremor in his fingers. I realized he was bleeding from his temple, a deep cut that oozed steadily, but he gave me no room to panic. His eyes locked on mine and silently commanded me, "Stay still, stay silent, stay alive." Above us, footsteps lingered. Then, after what felt like eternity, a car engine ignited in the distance. Tires crunched over gravel, then faded. We were alone. For minutes, perhaps hours, time had no meaning. My breath was ragged, my body trembling, but I kept hearing the mantra, "Pretend we're dead." I understood then what Robert meant. It wasn't just about fooling Ethan, it was about rebirth. If we survived this, if we rose from this cliff, it would not be as the same naive parents who had given too much, excused too much, ignored too many red flags. We would rise different, harder, clearer, wiser. I shifted slightly, the pain in my ribs stabbing with the effort, and whispered, "Why, Robert? Why would Ethan do this?" Robert closed his eyes briefly, as if to shut out the answer he already knew. "Because he thinks we're worth more dead than alive," he murmured back. And I realized that in some ways, this cliff was not the beginning of our story. It was the climax of years of quiet manipulation, subtle demands, and sacrifices we had made in the name of love. The push was physical, but the betrayal had begun long before. As I lay there, blood seeping through my blouse, the salt air burning my nostrils, a bitter thought cut deeper than the rocks beneath me. Perhaps Ethan had never loved us for who we were. Perhaps, for years, he had only loved what we could give. The cliff was simply the final, literal shove into the abyss he had been dragging us toward for so long. The mantra echoed one last time in my head, steady and cold as steel. Pretend we're dead. And in that moment, I understood we would survive, but we would never again be the same. If you had asked me only a year before that terrible day, I would have told you that Ethan was simply going through a rough patch. Mothers are experts in self-deception. We excuse the inexcusable because love blinds us, because guilt whispers that we should have done more, because memory feeds us with images of a sweet boy who once brought us dandelions as gifts. That boy lived forever in my heart, and it was easier to cling to him than to confront the truth of the man my son had become. Robert had seen it more clearly than I did. He used to sit across the kitchen table, his strong hands wrapped around a coffee mug, his eyes dark with worry. "Mabel," he would say in his quiet, steady voice, "there's something off with Ethan. He doesn't look at us the same way. It's not about love anymore, it's about what we can give him." I would wave my hand, try to dismiss his words. "He's just stressed, Robert. Work is hard, times are difficult. We just need to help him get through it." But deep inside, I knew my husband was right. Our lives had been simple but steady. We lived in a modest home, kept alive by Robert's pension and the careful savings we had accumulated after decades of work. Ethan, however, seemed to live in another world, a world where money slipped like water through his fingers. There were always new opportunities, new emergencies. First, it was a broken-down car. Then, a failed business venture. Later, the temporary loans that were never repaid. Each time, Robert and I sacrificed quietly, telling ourselves that this was what parents did. We endured beans and rice so that Ethan and his wife, Lena, could live more comfortably. At family gatherings, Ethan's tone had begun to change. He no longer asked how we were feeling. He no longer reminisced about childhood stories. Instead, conversations circled around finances. "Do you still have Dad's life insurance money untouched? What's the balance of your savings? Have you thought about downsizing your house?" Questions delivered with a smile that did little to hide the calculation in his eyes. I told myself that maybe he was simply planning for the future, but Robert's jaw would tighten, his silence heavy. One evening, about 2 weeks before the hike, Robert pulled me aside. His expression was serious, his voice lower than usual. "Promise me, Mabel, that if something ever feels wrong with Ethan, you won't brush it off. Promise me you'll listen to your instincts. There's something cold in him lately, something I can't quite explain." I nodded, but even then, I didn't want to believe it. He was our son. How could danger ever come from our own blood? Looking back, I see the signs were everywhere. Ethan had started dropping hints about inheritance. "It's not like you'll need all that money forever," he said once, half laughing, as if it were a joke. When Robert scolded him, he shifted quickly. "Relax, Dad. I was only kidding." But the laughter never reached his eyes. A few days later, Lena called me in tears about unpaid bills, only to post photos on social media of their weekend getaway at a luxury resort. My heart twisted, but I still sent them money. The cracks in our relationship widened with every sacrifice we made, but I refused to see the fracture for what it was. I told myself I was being a good mother, that love meant giving without asking for anything in return. But the truth? I was feeding a hunger that would never be satisfied. And then came Ethan's invitation. It was a warm afternoon when he called, his voice unusually bright. "Mom, Dad, let's do something we haven't done in years. Let's go hiking, like the old times. Just us three. No distractions." My heart leaped with fragile hope. Was this his way of reconnecting? Was this the boy I remembered, asking to share a memory, a tradition, a family moment? Robert's eyes, however, narrowed. He hesitated, and I saw the flicker of suspicion there. But when I looked at him with pleading eyes, silently asking him not to crush my hope, he sighed and agreed. If only I had listened to him. If only I had seen what he saw. The calculation behind the smile. The hidden edge behind the cheerful invitation. But mothers are dreamers, and my dream was that maybe, just maybe, my son was still the boy who once held my hand on that very trail, whispering, "Don't let go. Mommy, I'm scared of the dark." I never imagined that one day, on that same trail, he would be the darkness himself. The morning of the hike began deceptively ordinary. The sun was already warm when Ethan arrived at our house, smiling too wide, his voice too cheerful. "Ready for an adventure?" he asked, leaning against the doorway as though nothing in the world weighed on him. For a brief moment, I let myself believe his words. Perhaps this really was his attempt at reconciliation, at being the son we had longed to see again. Perhaps he wanted to remember who we were before money poisoned everything. But Robert's hand on my shoulder was tense, his eyes watchful. He didn't say anything, but I could feel the silent warning in his grip. Years of marriage had taught me to read his unspoken language. Be careful. We packed lightly water, sandwiches, a first aid kit. Robert slipped a small phone into his jacket pocket. One of those prepaid devices he had bought years ago just in case. He hadn't told Ethan. When I noticed, he only gave me a look, and I said nothing. I would later realize that his instinct may have saved our lives. When we stepped outside, Ethan insisted, "Let's just take one car. Mine has better mileage." Robert hesitated again, but I nudged him gently. "It will be fine," I whispered, even though a sliver of unease pricked at me. So we locked our house and climbed into Ethan's car. As we drove, I noticed he had chosen a route I didn't recognize. "Isn't this a bit farther than usual?" I asked. Ethan grinned in the rearview mirror. "This one's more secluded. No tourists. Just us. Mom, you'll love it. No tourists, just us." At the time, I tried to see it as a kindness, an attempt to give us privacy. But now, looking back, those words echo like a prelude to a nightmare. When we arrived, the parking lot was empty. The path ahead stretched into a dense wall of pines, the trailhead marked only by a weather-worn sign. Ethan parked quickly, shutting off the engine before I could change my mind. As Robert reached for his phone, Ethan chuckled. "No use bringing that, Dad. There's no signal out here. Leave it in the car. You don't want to weigh yourself down." Robert's jaw tightened. "I'll keep it," he said flatly, but Ethan's eyes lingered on him, cold for a moment, before softening again into that false smile. "Suit yourself." We began to climb. The air was crisp, pine needles crunching under our boots. Birds darted above, their songs thin in the heavy silence. Ethan walked ahead, his stride energetic, while Robert and I followed more slowly. He kept glancing back, too often, as if measuring the distance between us. At one point, I reached out and touched Robert's sleeve. "Do you think something's wrong?" I whispered. His answer was a simple nod. Halfway up, we stopped to drink water. Ethan handed me a bottle with a grin, but when I sipped, the taste felt metallic. Perhaps it was only in my imagination, but I discreetly handed the rest to Robert, who sniffed it before tucking it into his own pack without a word. The silence between them was thick, charged with unspoken suspicion. As the path narrowed, the edge of the cliff began to appear jagged rocks below, the sea crashing against them in rhythmic violence. My stomach twisted, but I forced myself to keep walking. Ethan turned and flashed a smile. "Remember when we came here years ago, Mom? You told me not to run near the edge because you were scared I'd fall." His eyes glittered strangely. "Funny, huh? Now I'm the one telling you to be careful." Robert stiffened beside me, his hand brushing mine, leaning close, so low I almost didn't hear. He whispered, "If anything happens, follow my lead. Trust me." The wind whipped harder as we reached the highest point, a place where the trail all but disappeared, leaving only a narrow stretch of ground between us and the yawning drop. Ethan's smile never wavered, but his steps slowed. He let us walk ahead just a bit, then closed the gap quickly. The air around him changed. It was no longer the warmth of a son inviting his parents on a nostalgic trip. It was something colder, sharper, like a predator circling its prey. I wanted to turn back. I wanted to say something. But before I could, Ethan's voice cut through the rushing wind. "Go on. Mom, look at the view. Isn't it beautiful?" And as I took that final step toward the edge, the chill down my spine told me the truth I had been refusing to see. This was not a family outing. This was a setup, a stage prepared for something far darker than a simple hike. The ocean stretched out endlessly below, a shifting canvas of blue and white that would have been beautiful had my stomach not been twisted in dread. The cliffside was raw and unforgiving, its jagged rocks spearing upward like teeth eager for prey. I tried to steady my breath, convincing myself I was being paranoid, that Ethan only wanted us to enjoy the view together. But Robert's silence beside me told me he felt the same unease. Then it happened. The force was sudden, sharp, deliberate. Ethan's hands pressed hard against my back, and in that split second, the world tilted. My feet lost the ground, and I felt the violent pull of gravity. The sky spun, the horizon vanished, and all I heard was the rushing roar of the sea as it surged closer and closer. My body collided with rock, pain erupting through my ribs and legs. For an instant, I couldn't breathe. I thought I was gone. But then I felt Robert crash beside me, half on the ledge, half hanging. His hand clawed against the stone until he found purchase, pulling himself close to me. His face was pale, blood streaking from his temple, but his eyes were alive, fierce, determined. And then came his whisper, ragged yet sharp as a blade slicing through fog. "Pretend we're dead." The words froze me in place. Instinct screamed to cry out, to beg Ethan to stop, to plead for understanding. But Robert's grip tightened around my wrist. His eyes burned into mine, demanding obedience. I forced my chest to rise and fall shallowly, mimicking stillness. My mouth opened in a silent gasp, but no sound came out. I made myself as lifeless as the rocks around me. Above us, gravel shifted. Ethan peered over the edge. I felt his gaze like heat searing my skin, scanning for movement. I prayed he couldn't hear the wild drum of my heart. He lingered there, muttering words carried away by the wind. Then, his voice reached us clear as the sky. "It's done. It's done." The phrase rang in my ears like a death knell. My own son had declared my life over. I squeezed my eyes shut, pressing my cheek against the cold stone, letting my hair fall across my face to mask any twitch. Robert did the same, his body unnaturally still, though I saw the tremor in his bleeding hand. Minutes crawled like hours. Stones tumbled as Ethan shifted, his shadow moving above. Then, footsteps receded. A car door slammed in the distance. The engine ignited, tires grinding over gravel until the sound faded into silence. We didn't move. Not at first. Not for what felt like eternity. My ribs screamed with pain. My body begged for relief. But Robert's mantra echoed in my skull. Pretend we're dead. Only when the sun had shifted and silence settled heavy did he finally whisper. Now, we dragged ourselves slowly, painfully, to a safer ledge. Every motion was agony, each breath a knife. But survival had taken root like fire in my veins. Robert's shirt was soaked with blood, and I felt the sting of cuts across my arms and face. Yet we were alive. Against all odds, against the betrayal of our own flesh and blood, we had survived. Why? I croaked, my voice broken, my throat raw. Robert's eyes met mine, shadowed with the answer he already knew but could barely bear to speak. Because he believes we're worth more dead than alive, he murmured. The truth hit harder than the rocks beneath me. As we clung to each other, bruised and bleeding, I realized this fall was not just physical. It was the collapse of illusions I had nurtured for decades. The fall was the death of the dream that my son's love was unconditional, the shattering of the belief that family blood was thicker than greed. We weren't dead, not yet, but something inside me had been buried forever on that cliffside. And as Robert's whisper replayed in my mind, it became more than a command for survival. It became a vow. We would rise from this, but the parents who returned would not be the same ones who had arrived. For several minutes after Ethan's car disappeared into the distance, Robert and I lay there, paralyzed between pain and terror. Every instinct screamed to climb, to crawl, to move, but fear anchored us. What if he came back? What if he realized the fall had not finished us and returned to make sure? The silence pressed against us, broken only by the crash of waves and the rasp of our uneven breathing. Finally, Robert gritted his teeth and whispered, "We have to move." Slowly. His voice was hoarse but firm, the voice of a man who had faced battles before, only this time the enemy was our own son. I nodded, forcing myself to push up from the ledge. My ribs throbbed in protest, sharp daggers of pain piercing each breath. Still, I dragged my body inch by inch toward the slope that descended into the ravine. Robert followed, his arm bent awkwardly, his shirt darkened with blood. Every step was agony, but survival demanded we ignore pain. The trail that had once been familiar was now unrecognizable, transformed into hostile terrain. Loose stones slipped under our boots, branches clawed at our clothes. Robert leaned heavily on me, yet I knew he was doing his best to shield me from the worst of it. His face was ashen, but his determination radiated stronger than the pain. "One step at a time, Mabel," he muttered. "Just one step at a time." We reached a narrow cut between rocks, hidden from view of the main path. There, Robert collapsed against the stone, clutching his side. His breathing was shallow, each inhale rattling with effort. Panic surged in my chest. "Robert, your ribs." He shook his head sharply. "No panic. Just think." His hand fumbled inside his jacket and pulled out the small prepaid phone he had hidden from Ethan. "It's old, but it might save us." I watched him press the power button, my heart hammering. The screen lit up dimly, no bars, no signal. My throat tightened. But Robert, always more prepared than I gave him credit for, tapped into the emergency settings. "Even without signal, it can send a location ping," he explained through gritted teeth. He scrolled quickly and sent an automated SOS message linked to his sister's number, an old safety measure he had set up years ago, one I had mocked as paranoia. At that moment, I realized his caution might be the reason we would live to see another day. I leaned my head against the cold rock, exhaustion dragging me down. But the mantra pulsed inside me, steady as my heartbeat. Pretend we're dead. It wasn't just about fooling Ethan anymore. It was about erasing the naive parents we had been. If Ethan thought we were gone, then in a way, we were. The people who rose from this cliff would not beg, would not excuse, would not blind themselves to betrayal again. When Robert's SOS went through, a flicker of hope sparked in me. If his sister received the location, someone would know where we were. We wouldn't vanish into the ocean. Another nameless tragedy at sea. We had a chance, but chance was not certainty. We began to move again, slowly descending into the ravine. My body screamed at me, but the thought of Ethan's face, the cold satisfaction when he said it's done, fueled me. Rage mingled with heartbreak, giving me the strength to stagger forward. Robert, though weak, managed to keep pace, his willpower stronger than his injuries. Hours passed before we finally reached a clearing where the forest opened, and the sound of a distant road teased our ears. Just as we paused to rest, my phone forgotten deep in my bag buzzed faintly with a single bar of signal. My hands trembled as I unlocked it. A message blinked on the screen from Robert's sister. "Are you okay? Just got your SOS. Sending police to the coordinates now." Tears blurred my vision. Relief mixed with dread. Help was coming. Yes, but so was the reckoning. Ethan believed us dead, and if he discovered otherwise, he would not stop until he finished what he had started. As Robert leaned against me, whispering almost there, I realized the fall was not the end of our nightmare. It was only the beginning. The cliff had taken our illusions, our trust, and nearly our lives. But it had also given us something new. Clarity. Clarity that the boy I had raised no longer existed. Clarity that love without respect was a weapon waiting to be used against me. And clarity that if we were to survive not just our injuries, but Ethan's betrayal, we would need more than hope. We would need proof, evidence, witnesses, a case strong enough to expose the truth. The mantra repeated itself in my mind, not as fear, but as resolve. Pretend we're dead. For now, yes, but not forever. Soon, we would rise not as victims, but as survivors ready to fight. When we finally stumbled back into our home, battered and bruised, the silence of the living room felt heavier than the cliff itself. I collapsed into the armchair, clutching my ribs, while Robert carefully lowered himself onto the sofa, his face pale but his eyes still burning with grim determination. For hours we sat there without words, the shock of survival hanging in the air like a storm that hadn't yet broken. It was Robert who finally spoke. "You know why he did it, Mabel." His voice was quiet, but it cut sharper than a knife. I shook my head, tears already stinging my eyes. No, he's our son. There has to be." Robert's eyes fixed on me, unwavering. "It's the money. It's always been the money." At first, I resisted the truth. But then the memories came, flooding me with scenes I had tried to excuse. Ethan's endless questions about our savings. The way he pressed about the life insurance payout after Robert's heart scare 2 years ago. The casual jokes, "When you're gone, Mom, I'll finally be able to breathe easy," said with a smirk that I had brushed off as thoughtless humor. And Lena, always by his side, whispering, coaxing, tightening her grip on his choices. We had received the first undeniable clue only months earlier. Robert's banker, an old friend of his, had quietly warned him that Ethan had been asking questions at the branch. He wanted to know about beneficiary transfers, about whether a policyholder could change who received payouts without the original recipient noticing. At the time, Robert brushed it aside, believing it to be curiosity. Now, with our bodies aching from his shove off the cliff, that curiosity rang with lethal intent. I thought of the $50,000 Robert had left in savings after a lifetime of labor. Money meant to be our cushion, our peace in old age, our safeguard against illness. To Ethan and Lena, It had become a prize waiting to be collected. And if we weren't willing to hand it over willingly, then perhaps my stomach turned at the thought they believed nature just needed a nudge. The more I pieced it together, the more I realized this wasn't sudden. It had been building for years. Every loan, every emergency, every guilt-laden phone call from Lena had been bricks in a wall of manipulation. And behind each brick was greed. Ethan's gambling debts, whispered rumors of a failed investment scheme, and Lena's lavish tastes, designer clothes, weekend getaways, new furniture flaunted on social media while crying poverty to us. They were drowning, and we had been their lifeboat. But now, perhaps they had decided we were easier to cut loose than to keep afloat. Robert leaned forward, his voice grim. They've been rehearsing this, testing how far we'd go, how much we'd give, and when we finally stopped, he trailed off, but his eyes spoke the words he couldn't. When we stopped, they decided to take everything. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house made me flinch. Every shadow on the wall seemed like Ethan returning to finish what he had started. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, remembering birthdays where Ethan smiled only when he opened his gift envelopes. Remembering the time Lena hugged me tightly, whispering, "You're like a second mother to me," just before asking for money for a medical emergency that turned out to be a spa weekend. Lies, all of it. Sweet words coated with poison. The next morning, Robert sat at the kitchen table with papers spread before him, insurance statements, savings accounts, even copies of old checks. He tapped them with his finger. This is what they want, Mabel. Not us. Not our love. Just this. His voice shook with fury. He pushed his own parents for numbers on a page. I stared at the papers, anger rising to meet my grief. How many times had I skipped doctor's appointments to save money for Ethan? How many times had I worn the same coat winter after winter so I could pay their rent? How many nights had I gone to bed hungry so they could eat? And for what? To be shoved off a cliff like an inconvenient obstacle. As Robert continued to gather documents, I realized something vital. We couldn't just survive. We had to prove it. We needed evidence strong enough that Ethan couldn't twist our story into madness. Because I knew him, and I knew Lena. If we told the police without proof, they would spin it. They would say we were confused, paranoid, too old to remember things correctly. They would paint themselves as concerned children and us as frail parents losing our minds. But Robert had already anticipated this. We keep every receipt, every transfer, every message, he said firmly. We build the case brick by brick, the same way they built their manipulation. Only this time, the wall will be against them. In that moment, the mantra shifted inside me. Pretend we're dead. Yes, to Ethan, we were. Let him think he succeeded. Let him relax. Let him slip. While he celebrated, we would prepare. We would come back not as victims, but as witnesses. Not as broken parents, but as survivors armed with the truth. And for the first time since the cliff, I felt something new rising in me. Not just fear, not just sorrow, but anger sharpened into resolve. If Ethan thought money was worth more than our lives, then we would show him the cost of underestimating the strength of the very parents he had tried to bury. The morning after Robert spread the papers across the table, our kitchen no longer felt like the safe heart of our home. It felt like a war room. Bank statements, old checks, handwritten notes of every emergency Ethan and Lena had ever called us about. They were all spread out like evidence of a crime, which in truth, they were. Only the crime wasn't just theft. It was betrayal that had nearly ended with our blood on the rocks. Robert, still stiff with pain, kept his pen steady as he listed every transfer, every cash withdrawal, every check written in Ethan's name. We need to quantify it, he said through gritted teeth. Not just for the police, but for ourselves. So we never forget the price of our blindness. The total mounted quickly. $33,400 over 3 years. Money we had saved for our twilight years. Money we had worked decades for. Gone. When we went to the police, the station smelled faintly of coffee and ink, and the officer at the desk greeted us politely, but with that faint air of skepticism people often give to the elderly. His name was Officer Daniels. He was in his 40s, broad-shouldered, with eyes that flicked from Robert's bandaged temple to my bruised ribs. "You're saying your son pushed you?" His tone was professional but cautious. "Yes," Robert said firmly. "He invited us on a hike and tried to kill us. We survived because we landed on a ledge." Officer Daniels tilted his head, clearly skeptical. "And what makes you believe it was intentional?" I wanted to scream. What made us believe? Wasn't the shove, the deliberate force, enough? But Robert stayed calm, sliding the stack of papers across the desk. "Because he's been trying to drain us for years. Because he's been asking about life insurance policies. Because he had motive and opportunity. And because after he pushed us, he looked over the edge and said, 'It's done.'" The officer studied us quietly. Then he sighed, pulling out a form. "I'll file your statement. We'll need corroboration witnesses, physical evidence. Do you have anything else?" That's when Robert reached into his jacket and handed over the prepaid phone. The SOS ping. It sent our location right after the fall. My sister got it. It proves we were on that trail when we said we were. Daniels examined the device, his skepticism softening just slightly. "That helps, but it's still circumstantial. If your son claims it was an accident, we'll need more. The word sank into me like ice, as though almost dying at the hands of our child wasn't enough, as though the bruises on my body, the gash on Robert's head, the shattered trust of parents betrayed weren't proof. But I understood. The law needed more than feelings. It needed evidence that couldn't be twisted. So we gathered every text Ethan had sent asking for money, every voicemail Lena left, her voice dripping with sweetness before the inevitable plea. "We're in trouble. Could you help us one more time?" We saved screenshots of their social media, the photos from expensive weekends taken right after those desperate calls. We listed every date, every dollar. But evidence wasn't only numbers. It was patterns. And Robert, sharp as ever despite his injuries, began mapping those patterns. Every request lined up with a purchase or a trip. Every emergency had a lie behind it. "They've built their life on our sacrifice," he muttered. "And now they're desperate because the well has run dry." We also spoke to neighbors. Our closest, Eleanor, recalled Ethan's late-night visits, the raised voices, the tension that leaked through our walls. She agreed to testify if needed. Even Mr. Klein, the bank manager who had seen me sign away transfer after transfer, said he'd provide a statement about the unusual financial activity. Piece by piece, we built the wall Robert had promised, a fortress of facts that would stand against Ethan and Lena's lies. But the more we worked, the clearer it became. Ethan wouldn't sit quietly while we exposed him. He would fight back. That fear proved right when, one afternoon, as I was sorting papers by the dining table, the phone rang. The screen flashed Ethan's name. My stomach twisted, but I didn't answer. A moment later, a text appeared. "Mom, please, we need to talk. You're confused. People are manipulating you. Don't let outsiders ruin our family." My hands trembled as I read it. Outsiders. He meant the police. He meant Eleanor. He meant anyone who threatened his control. I deleted the message without replying, but my heart pounded with new dread. He wasn't just greedy. He was preparing a counterattack. Robert looked up from his notes. He's trying to paint you as unstable. He'll twist this until you're the villain. He was right. And as much as that terrified me, it also hardened me, because I realized Ethan wasn't only trying to steal money. He was trying to steal reality itself, to rewrite what happened, to turn us into unreliable narrators of our own survival. That night, I sat by the window, watching the shadows stretch across our lawn. For the first time in my life, I locked every door, checked every window twice, and left the porch light burning, not to keep strangers out, but to keep my own son at bay. The mantra whispered again in my chest: pretend we're dead, not to give in, but to bide our time, to let him think we were broken, helpless, silenced, while in truth, we were building the one thing he never expected us to have: power. The first call came just after dawn. My phone buzzed insistently on the nightstand, Ethan's name glowing on the screen. My chest tightened, but I let it ring until it silenced itself. A minute later, it rang again, and again. By the fourth call, Robert reached over, placed his hand on mine, and whispered, "Don't answer." Not yet. But Ethan was relentless. When the calls stopped, the texts began. "Mom, please. You're not thinking clearly. We just want to help. Dad is manipulating you against me. He's always been hard on me, hasn't he? You're confused. People are filling your head with lies. We're your family. Don't you trust me?" The words stabbed deeper than the wounds on my body. Not because I believed them by then. My eyes were wide open, but because they showed how far he was willing to go. He was rewriting the story, painting himself as the victim, and me as the unstable mother, too fragile to know her own mind. Later that afternoon, Lena's number appeared. Against my better judgment, I picked up. Her voice was syrupy, trembling with manufactured sincerity. "Mabel, thank God you answered. We've been so worried. Ethan told me you're not well, that you've been saying strange things. Please, let us come over, cook you dinner, take care of you, like family should." For a moment, her words tugged at my heart. I remembered the countless times I had comforted her, the money I had handed her, the sympathy I had poured into her complaints. But then I thought of her standing at the wedding ceremony where I was not invited, smiling in her white dress while I sat at home with a useless pink one in my closet. I thought of her saying, "We only invited special people." My chest hardened. "You didn't sound so worried when you excluded me from your wedding, Lena," I said evenly. The silence on the line was sharp, brittle. Then her voice cracked into sobs. "Please, don't bring that up again. We made mistakes, but we love you. You're like a second mother to me." I almost laughed, bitter and hollow. "A second mother you tried to kill," I whispered. The sobs stopped instantly. A pause. Then, in a cooler voice, Lena said, "You don't understand the pressure we're under. The debts, the bills. We thought this was the only way." Her slip of honesty chilled me to the bone. She didn't deny it. She didn't express shock that I accused her. She simply tried to justify. Robert took the phone from me then, his voice steady and firm. "Lena, if you contact us again, it will be through the police or through a lawyer. Do not come near this house." He ended the call before she could reply. But they didn't stop. The next day, we came back from the police station to find 3 cars parked near our house: Ethan's, Lena's, and one I didn't recognize. Through the curtains, I saw them pacing in our yard, their movements agitated. My stomach turned. Robert set his jaw. They're testing us. They want to see if we'll open the door, if we'll crumble. Instead of confronting them, I quietly picked up the phone and called Officer Daniels. Minutes later, a patrol car arrived. From behind the window, I watched the officers speak to Ethan, who gestured wildly, his face twisted in anger. Lena cried, her body bent in practiced despair. The stranger with them, a man in a gray suit, carried a folder under his arm, papers, no doubt, meant to intimidate us. When the police finally told them to leave, Ethan turned his head toward our window. His eyes locked on mine through the glass, and for a moment, I saw not a son but a predator stripped bare of excuses. His lips moved, though I couldn't hear the words. I read them anyway. This isn't over. That night, I couldn't eat. The food sat untouched on my plate as Robert reassured me. They're desperate. Desperation makes people reckless, but it also makes them sloppy. I nodded, but fear not at me, because I knew what was coming. If manipulation and intimidation failed, they would escalate. People like Ethan and Lena didn't stop when love was gone, when guilt no longer worked. They didn't stop until everything was stripped away. As I lay in bed, sleep eluding me, I heard Robert's whisper again in the dark. Pretend we're dead. Only now, it wasn't about tricking Ethan on the cliff. It was about enduring his attempts to erase us, to twist our sanity, to bury us alive in lies. We would have to play their game carefully, quietly, until the truth was undeniable. And in the quiet of that long night, I made a silent vow. If Ethan wanted war, then war he would have. But it would not be fought with screams or tears. It would be fought with truth, with proof, with the iron will of parents who refused to die for their child's greed. The day the reckoning came was colder than usual, though it wasn't the weather that made me shiver. It was the weight of dread and anticipation, pressing on my chest like stones. Robert and I had been preparing for this moment, collecting every receipt, every message, every whisper of proof that Ethan and Lena had turned our love into currency. Now, at last, it was no longer just our word against theirs. It was evidence against greed. It began with a call from Officer Daniels. His voice was clipped, professional, but I heard the undertone of tension. Mrs. Carter, Mr. Carter, I need you both to come down to the station today. We've made some progress on your case. Progress. The word pulsed in my ears. 4 weeks. I had lived on the edge, every sound at the door a potential threat, every shadow a ghost of Ethan's betrayal. Could it finally be turning? At the station, we were led to a small room where Daniels placed a recorder on the table. We've intercepted something, he said, his eyes steady on mine. A voicemail Ethan left for one of his associates. It confirms motive. He pressed play. The voice that filled the room was unmistakable. Ethan's, my son's, my boy. They won't be a problem anymore, he said casually, as though discussing a broken appliance instead of his parents. I pushed them. They're gone. It's done. We can move forward now. Once we get access to the accounts, everything will be fine. My heart stopped. The air drained from the room. The words echoed again and again. I pushed them. They're gone. It's done. My hands trembled so violently that Robert reached over to steady me. Tears blurred my vision, but I refused to break in front of the officer. If Ethan had stripped me of my illusions, I would not give him the satisfaction of stripping me of my dignity too. Daniels continued. We also have corroborating evidence. Surveillance cameras from the gas station on the way to the trail show Ethan buying energy drinks at the exact time he claimed to be at home. Phone records place him in the area of the cliff. And your financial documents combined with statements from your neighbor Eleanor and the bank manager paint a clear picture of motive. It was airtight. For the first time, I felt the ground steady beneath me. When they arrested Ethan later that day, I wasn't there to see it. Daniels advised against it. It'll be messy. Best you stay home. But part of me wanted to look him in the eye one last time, to search his face for even a flicker of remorse. Instead, all I could do was imagine it: the flashing lights, the cuffs clicking shut, Lena's shrill voice crying that it was all a mistake. That evening, Daniels came by our house to deliver the update. Ethan had been charged with attempted murder and conspiracy to commit fraud. Lena, though slippery as ever, was facing charges of aiding and abetting. They would stand trial. The law had finally caught up to the children who believed they could rewrite truth itself. I sat in the silence of our living room, the news settling over me like dust after an explosion. Robert's hand was warm on mine, grounding me, but my soul was in turmoil. Relief battled grief. Anger fought sorrow, because justice, though necessary, never comes without a price. I had lost my son, not on the cliff, not in the courtroom, but in the slow erosion of love over years of manipulation. The boy who once clung to my hand in the dark had vanished long before he shoved me into the abyss. That boy was gone, replaced by a man who measured his parents' worth in bank accounts and insurance policies. And now, whatever fragile thread still connected us had snapped forever. I whispered it aloud, more to myself than to Robert. I didn't lose a son today. I just finally saw the truth. I never really had him in the way I thought I did. Robert squeezed my hand, his voice steady. You still have yourself, Mabel. You still have me. And you have the truth. That's enough. As the night deepened, I sat by the window, staring at the stars that glimmered faintly above the darkened horizon. They had watched me fall. They had watched me rise again. And now, they bore witness to my reckoning. The mantra whispered once more in my heart, but with new meaning. Pretend we're dead. No longer just survival. It was a rebirth. The mother who excused, who sacrificed, who blinded herself to betrayal, she was gone. In her place stood a woman who had faced the abyss and climbed back stronger. The weeks that followed Ethan's arrest were the strangest of my life. The world outside looked the same: sunlight streaming through the curtains in the morning, the kettle whistling for tea, neighbors tending their gardens. But inside me, everything had changed. The woman who once tiptoed around her son's moods, who starved herself of joy to feed his wants, was gone. And though grief pressed heavily on my heart, it was grief with a strange clarity, like mourning someone who had been lost long before you admitted it. For the first time in years, Robert and I made plans that were about us. We fixed the broken latch on the garden gate not because Ethan had asked, but because we wanted to. We sat in the living room and talked about places we had never seen: Paris, Rome, maybe even the Grand Canyon, though the thought of cliffs still made my stomach turn. And when we laughed together, really laughed, it wasn't to cover pain or to pretend things were fine. It was because life, fragile as it was, still held sweetness worth tasting. One morning, I walked past the closet where my pale pink dress still hung, untouched. The dress I had bought for a wedding that had never been mine to attend. For a moment, my throat tightened. That dress had once represented hope, the dream of being part of my son's happiest day. Now, it was only fabric and broken illusions. I touched it gently, then folded it into a donation bag. Someone else will make new memories in this, I whispered, and in letting it go, I felt a strange freedom. There were nights when memories of the cliff haunted me. I would wake with the echo of Ethan's shove, the rush of wind in my ears, the cold rocks beneath my hands. But then I would hear Robert's whisper beside me. Pretend we're dead. and I would remember it wasn't a curse. It was survival. It was the reason I still drew breath, the reason I could choose again. Eleanor became a constant presence, her laughter spilling into our kitchen like sunlight. She and her garden club friends invited me to join their gatherings, and I discovered the quiet joy of friendship built not on obligation but on sincerity. We shared stories, some bitter, some sweet, and I realized how many of us had been fooled by the same illusion that love could be bought, that sacrifice would guarantee devotion. The truth was harsher, but also purer. Real love is proven not by what it takes, but by what it gives without asking. I often wondered if Ethan sat in his cell thinking of me, of the parents he had tried to bury. Did he feel regret, shame, even a flicker of the love he once had as a boy clutching my hand? Or did he only mourn the money he had failed to seize? I may never know, and perhaps it doesn't matter, because his choices no longer define me. I am not just Ethan's mother. I am Mabel Carter, a woman who survived betrayal, who stared down death, and who chose life not once, but twice. So, my dear ones, if you take anything from my story, let it be this: love is never a transaction. Do not waste your years trying to purchase the affection of those who only count your worth in dollars. Protect your heart, protect your dignity, and never forget you are worthy of respect simply because you exist. I may have lost a son, but I found myself. And that, I have learned, is a kind of rebirth. If my story touched you, I ask you kindly leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with someone who may need to hear it. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done in my place? I love reading your reflections, and your words always remind me that none of us are truly alone. With all my heart, thank you for listening. Until next time, your friend, Mabel.